community has tens of thousands of members, and CTO Craft provides them with coaching, mentoring circles, a curated Slack community, international conferences, and events like this one. If you're not a member of the CTO Craft community and are interested in becoming one, or you'd like to get updates on these events on email, I've posted some links in the chat to help you to do just that. I'd like to say a huge thanks to CTO Craft's sponsor partners for making these Bytes events possible. Partners including Google Cloud, Vention, and Albany Partners, amongst others. And a big thank you to Swarmia for partnering us for this event today. CTO Craft membership gives you access to some unique benefits from some of these partners. So please do click in the link that's in the chat to find out more. So hello and welcome. I'm Zoe Cunningham. I'm a director at Software Technology, having worked there for over 20 years, coming up to 25, having started as a coder back in 2000. So now my role focuses on engaging with the tech community through events like this one, and I also host the software podcast, Tech Talks, which is of course available on all good podcast platforms. Today, I'm so thrilled to be joined by Rebecca Murphey, who is the Head of Engagement and Insights at Swarmia. Rebecca, can I ask you to tell us a bit about yourself and your company and your role? Yeah, all of it.
all the things, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me here. Really glad to get to talk to this group. So I'm Rebecca. I'm actually, I can have up a slide while I say who I am. So I'm the Head of Engineering Engagement Insights at Swarmia, like Zoe said. And what that means is that I kind of help our sales and marketing and engineering and product organizations understand the landscape of software engineering, especially in the productivity space. And that's what Swarmia does. So Swarmia is a tool to help you and your organization understand and improve how work is flowing through your organization and where you're spending your time, and helps you identify places where maybe you don't want to be spending your time. So I joined Swarmia earlier this year, and previously I was deeply involved in developer productivity at both Stripe and Indeed, the job search company. So now I'm just bringing that expertise to Swarmia, where they pay me to just talk to you like this.
Well, Rebecca is going to be talking to us about embedding developer experience into your organization, which I'm thrilled to hear more about. We'll have a little Q&A at the end, but also please do feel free to drop a comment or Q&A, and Rebecca will interact during as well. But don't worry, if she doesn't manage to get to your question, we will do a Q&A at the end. And with that, over to you, Rebecca.
All right, thank you so much, Zoe. And like Zoe said, feel free to drop questions into the chat. I am going to keep an eye on it. I can just do this talk straight through, but I welcome any questions that you have, and we can during the talk. So thank you all for being here. Just full disclosure, it is 7:34 in the morning where I am, so I'm doing my best to be bright and chipper. So feedback appreciated on that. But yeah, today I want to talk about embedding developer experience into your engineering organization. And I showed you this a minute ago, but I'll just pull this up again. I'm Rebecca Murphey. You can find me at rmurphy with an E pretty much anywhere. And I really do love to continue the conversation after the talk. So find me on, I don't know if Twitter will still be around by the time this talk is over, but you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter, and of course, always drop me an email. And then I also have a podcast called Engineering Unblocked, where I talk to engineering leaders and engineering direct contributors about their lived experience navigating productivity challenges in a software engineering organization. So if that sounds interesting to you, go check out unblocked.fm. I'll be putting up a new episode there, hopefully next week. Once this talk is behind me, I'll get another one up there. So today I'm here to talk about developer experience. You may have heard of it as DevX, just an X, DevX, EX, DX, etc. So it's all sorts of things. But developer experience fundamentally is, what is it like to build software at the company where I work? What is it? developer experience truly encompasses how much am I getting paid, and am I getting raises when I expect, and am I being performance managed appropriately. But in this, we're going to zero in a little bit more on the developer experience of actually building and shipping software, and how we can make that a more predictable experience that has lots of visibility around what's going on, who's contributing, where things are stuck, etc. So yeah, developer experience is the overall experience of a developer when they're building software at your company. So that means, how do developers perceive the tools that they're using? How do they feel about how they are working? Are they working collaboratively? Are they working in a silo? Are they having to work with somebody who's particularly difficult? Are they working, the team is great, but they aren't excited about what they're working on? Do they value the work that they're doing and recognize the value that they are contributing by doing that work? All these things kind of add up to what is it like to be a developer at, again, at your company. So I've spent a lot of time at Stripe and Indeed thinking about how to actually improve developer experience and improve what it's like to be a software engineer at a company. And this is obviously tongue-in-cheek, but what it comes down to is, number one, you need to reliably learn about, and then number two, systematically eliminate the things that make the experience bad. It's kind of tautological, I agree, but really this is what it comes down to, is you need to learn, and then you need to address. Learn and address, learn and address. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some ways that you can kind of embed that cycle into your software engineering organization. A really important thing to know is that size, age, and culture really shape your path when it comes to productivity. This is something that at Swarmia we just keep coming back to again and again and again as we're talking about customers and kind of where they are in their productivity journey. These three things really define the options that'll be available to you, the options that may be closed off to you. So number one, size. How many people are in your engineering organization? If you have 5 people in your engineering organization, you probably don't have to worry that much about their productivity. And if you have to worry about their productivity, that is probably a hiring problem more than an organizational problem. At 5, we should have things pretty well in hand, one would hope. But as a company gets larger, the costs of collaborating across all of the nodes in the organization increases. And so you can bring a solution to bear in the productivity space for a company with 20 engineers that maybe isn't going to work so well for a company with 200 engineers or 2,000 like we had at Stripe. So really, you're likely, depending on the size of your organization, basically you're likely to have different kinds of problems. And so there really is, in all these ways, there really is no one-size-fits-all solution to here is how you can become productive. Age, the age of your company is another thing that really impacts the productivity solution space that's available to you, the developer experience solution space that's available to you. So a company that started in 2010, for example, had a lot of different tech choices that it needed to make than a company that started in 2020. And so if you look at a company like Stripe, they were started in, I think, 2010, and they had to build a lot of stuff that today you would just pick off the shelf and send your check to whatever SaaS company, and the solution is there for you. So, for example, stuff like Cloudflare Pages, where you can preview your changes in a cloud environment, just didn't exist in 2010. And so companies like Stripe or other companies that were growing up around then had to solve those kinds of problems themselves, or they didn't solve those problems themselves. Either way, today, 13 years later, it's pretty hard to bolt on new modern software into a kind of code base and ecosystem that has existed for more than a decade. Not impossible, but it definitely changes the equation as far as the level of difficulty. And then finally, culture. This is, I think that culture is one of the most powerful influencers over what it's like to build software at a company. And culture, I don't necessarily mean like how good is the food in the cafeteria and what kinds of drinks do you have in the kitchen. I mean a lot more like are people encouraged to collaborate with each other? Are people encouraged to unblock each other before they work on their own work? Are people encouraged to speak up when they feel like something's off track, and do they feel like they can do that safely? So yeah, psychological safety and just really how your organization works also is going to influence how productive and how good an experience you can create. The counterpoint of that is that if you have a culture where people are afraid to admit that they're behind on something, if you have a culture where people really work individually and want all the credit and don't want to share the credit with others on their team, then you're going to end up with a really different problem to solve in the productivity space, because productivity and experience do depend so much on healthy collaboration, healthy sharing of information. I want to pause there for just a minute and have you think, where's your company in the size, age, and culture space? And you can drop things into the chat if you'd like. But just think for a minute. I mean, number one, how many people do you have? Number two, when were you founded? And what are the technology decisions that you are kind of continuing to carry since then? And then what kind of culture are you creating? Are you creating a culture in your organization that is going to foster the communication and the openness that's required for good experience and good productivity? All right. For the rest of this talk, I'm going to talk about this. You ever had to come up with an acronym and it's really late at night and you have to give the talk the next day? It wasn't quite like that. I kind of arrived at this acronym just through doing some mind mapping of what kind of goes into bringing developer experience and that practice into an organization. It's a cheesy acronym, but I have actually keep coming back to it because I think that it really lays out exactly the kinds of steps that you need to take in order to make this a real thing in your culture. So I don't know if you like the brain emoji or the zombie emoji. You can take your pick, but let's dive in here. So if you are in a position where you know that your developers are struggling to be as productive as you think they can be, and they're not feeling good about that either. You know, engineers like to be productive. Engineers like to ship, and if they're feeling like there's things getting in the way of them shipping, or that their work is getting thrown away, or that their work is being held up by process or by technology, then engineers aren't feeling good. And so we want to understand where we are today as far as delivery and team health. So you know on this journey whether things are getting better or worse. So a couple of tools are useful for this. Oh, Maxim can't see the speaker or the slides. I just want to make sure that we are doing this correctly. Okay, things just hand, so I'm gonna keep going. So a few things that we can do to kind of establish like what is the baseline truth today. So a few things that we can do to help us with that. Number one, I don't know if you've heard of DORA metrics, but DORA metrics are there's kind of 4 key metrics that zero in on how a team is delivering software. It's really focused on delivery. It's not focused on kind of the broader experience, but it's a great place to start to kind of understand where you are. So DORA metrics are things like lead time, from the time you start on an issue to the time it's in production, how long does it take? Change failure rate. So when you put a change in production, how often do you have to roll it back or otherwise address a problem? What's the time when you do have an issue in production? What's the time to resolve it? Can you resolve it in 30 seconds? Not such a big deal, but if it takes you 3 hours, maybe a pretty big deal. And then finally, the deploy frequency. So are you deploying once a week, once a day, once an hour, whenever you feel like it? Understanding those things will help you establish as kind of a baseline for where are we today. And there are various tools that you can use to measure these DORA metrics. But it's generally a pretty easy thing to connect up to GitHub and maybe your issue tracker as well to understand how work is flowing using these metrics. It can feel a little artificially premature to be doing this sort of instrumentation when you do have only a handful of engineers and don't have a large group or maybe multiple teams. But getting these metrics in place early means that you will always have them. And I cannot express to you the value of always having them and being able to look back historically and understand whether things are getting better or worse. So really recommend getting something like DORA in place. Full disclosure, Swarmia is one of the tools that will help you get those metrics out of your systems. And that's a very small part of what Swarmia does. But if you're interested in talking about that, please hit me up. So this is not an ad for Swarmia for the rest of this, but you can also do surveys again at 5 engineers. That's probably a little silly to be doing a survey, asking engineers how they feel. But surveys can also be a way to just get to surface any concerns that people maybe aren't sharing in one-on-ones or aren't sharing freely with their team. So anonymous surveys are another tactic that you can use to bring insight into your organization about productivity. The challenge with surveys is that they are lagging and they're very imprecise, right? So somebody could have a really bad day driving to work that day, for those of us who still do that, not me. But somebody could have a really bad day getting to work that day, and then they answer the survey and they're in a bad mood. And so their answers are really moment in time and not necessarily indicative of their broader experience. So, but basically the general point stands that first and foremost, you want to understand where you are today so that you can start to see improvements or see backsliding if that's what's happening. For those folks who can't see the slides, I'll definitely share them. They're not that interesting. They're pretty much the words that I'm saying out loud, but I'll happily share them afterwards. And if you can hear me, you're getting the best part. You don't need to see me at 7:30 in the morning. The next step in bringing developer experience into your organization is to really, like I said at the beginning, we need to understand what the things are that are making it difficult for your engineers to do their work. And this just involves research and talking to them. At Stripe, we spent a whole week just shadowing engineers and watching them try to do their work and interviewing them. And we've even at Stripe, the CTO every few months would do what was called an engineerication, where he would get his hands dirty and actually work on a feature with the team to understand what the developer experience was like. So getting close to your engineers and watching them work, not in a creepy way. At Stripe, we would tell engineers, like, if we're watching you and you're having a hard time, that's my fault. That's not your fault. Like, I am here to fix that. And if you're not having a good experience trying to do your work, that shouldn't reflect poorly on you. So getting close to your engineers and understanding, watching them work, understanding where, like, oh my gosh, you have to click that button 5 times? What's that about? Just observing these tiny little things that can actually accumulate and have a pretty big impact on your engineers. The next thing to do is to take, once you've learned about some of these issues, and truly these issues can be simple things like, I have to click a button 5 times, or 50% of the time when I try to do this task, it errors on me for some reason that isn't really my fault, or something like that. Really pick one. Pick one of those ideas that comes up and go work on addressing it. This sounds really simple, like you have a list of things, I'll go do them. But one of the things about developer experience is the engineers in your organization are they get a lot of encouragement from seeing that this stuff is being worked on. So even if it's not getting better overnight, knowing that it's being worked on can in itself kind of change the perspective of engineers so that they understand that this stuff is important to the organization, to leadership, and it may even make them feel more permitted to do their own kind of productivity work. So find some quick wins. Don't get overly fixated on how you're going to measure them or how you're going to prove that they were worth doing. You can measure them by the happy emojis that people are putting in Slack when you announce the change. The first thing before we get all processy about it is just to get this flywheel turning of we see a problem and we solve a problem. We can't solve all the problems, and some of the problems are going to be so big that we need quarters and not weeks to solve them. But getting that flywheel going of we see a problem, we solve a problem. At the same time, we want to make sure that we keep seeing problems and hearing about them. We don't necessarily want to depend on an engineer seeking out the right person to tell that they're struggling with the deployment process. We want to make it really easy once we kind of recognize the nature of things that are slowing developers down. We want to make it really easy for them to report those issues to us. So not with a survey, you're going to get information about like what happened last week. We want to flip that on its head and actually make it so that people can tell you when they experience the issue, that they are experiencing an issue. You'll get a lot more reliable data that way, and you'll get a lot more kind of less spiky data than you might get through surveys or other things where you're actually pulling the information when you let people push this information to you, which we did with they could submit it with a command line, or they could click a button on most any web page they were on. Made it really easier for people to say, this isn't working for me, and to register that with someone who is paying attention to the developer experience. So at this point, and I should have said at the beginning, developer experience is a long game. There's no done to it unless your company stops writing code. That's when you're done. As long as you're writing code, and as long as you are, perhaps adding people, but really just as long as you're adding code, developer experience is going to continue to be something that you need to pay attention to. And I saw this at both Stripe and Indeed, where you had a process that worked really well when there were 200 software engineers at the company, or 100 software engineers at the company, and suddenly that process is getting slower and slower and slower as you're adding engineers or as you're adding code. At one company, we had a monorepo, kind of. It's complicated, but we had a monorepo, and for years that was fine and great. And then eventually it started to get so big that Git actions started to get really slow. So simply doing stuff like Git pull would take a really unacceptable amount of time. So that's an example of how problems will arise over time just because your code is growing, and especially if your organization is growing as well. So this is why it's time to start thinking beyond the low-hanging fruit. It may be that you recognize there's a need for standardization, and one place this often comes up is with development environments. It's very typical that when a company starts, everybody's got their own development environment locally, and they've all manicured it to be exactly how they want it to be. And then you add a few more engineers and a few more engineers, and somewhere along the line, it becomes somebody's part-time job to support the fact that development environments work. And it's a really hard job because everyone has their own. development environment. This is an example of a place where it may actually be time to create some standardization around how things get done. So maybe you want to containerize your development or move to some sort of remote development environment. Those are the kinds of projects that are extremely impactful, but they're not quick wins necessarily. And that's where it's time to think about, do we need to actually invest in this area? Is this something that people are doing on the side when they have some downtime? Are they doing it, with a rotation for a few weeks where they just focus on developer experience? Once you've got that flywheel going of you're getting the reports about what's not working and you're fixing them, it's time to think about how much you want to actually invest in this. And it's pretty wild how much it can make sense to invest in this. It's do some really squishy math and kind of come up with, at a certain size, you probably want about somewhere between 5 and 15% of your organization just working on this, which is crazy. But the reason that calculation starts to make sense is because the improvement that you can drive is so high leverage because it affects every engineer in the organization, that you can, once you reach a certain size, spending engineers just on making other engineers more productive and have a better experience is actually a really smart financial decision because it helps with retention of engineers, it helps with the productivity of the engineers, and it helps with the satisfaction of the engineers, which makes them more excited to do work and more likely to do that work at high quality. So again, once you've kind of gotten some of the basic stuff out of the way and you're starting to think longer term about this, this is typically an area where companies will actually invest and put together a team. Another place that this often comes up is the build. Like, what is it like to build and test your software? When you start, you enter npm run test and like boom, done. The build's done and the test ran and it all took less than 30 seconds. But as you accumulate code and as you accumulate more code authors, that time creeps up, and eventually you're going to have somebody whose job it is to make sure that npm run test continues to be fast. And that is eventually a pretty interesting engineering problem, how you keep things like that running fast as your application grows. So you're going to want to start. There's no free lunch here, and there's no world where you can kind of do this on the side for long. I'd say somewhere around 50 and 100 engineers, it becomes pretty obvious that at least one person probably ought to be working on this kind of stuff. And as you grow beyond that, it can make sense to have truly a team and eventually maybe even an organization focused on this. So at Stripe, I think we had definitely upwards of 100 engineers just working on developer productivity and experience. So back when I was coming up with this acronym, I knew I wanted to get to brains, and I couldn't figure out what the N was going to be. But my friend helped me. My friend from Stripe, who has gone through a lot of this herself, was like, "You have to normalize it." There's my N. And by normalize, I mean you need to make it normal to do things in a consistent way. You need to make it normal that you use that standard development environment. You need to make it normal that you buy into this build process or build tooling that allows teams to keep adding tests without making the build take forever. You need to, again, just make it normal that we do things in a certain way for certain reasons. This can be a really hard thing because autonomy is really important to engineers, and we don't want those engineers to perceive that we're taking that autonomy away. There's a time in an organization's life where having that autonomy to set up your own environment, do things your own way, really does contribute to the iteration speed that you can achieve, and that's really important at a small size for a company. But there is a tipping point that happens, again, probably somewhere around 50 or 100 engineers, where it actually becomes inefficient that people are doing things in different ways. And you can actually, and this is a hard thing to convince them of perhaps, but you can actually make them happier if they adopt the standard way of doing things, because that becomes a leverage point where you can make improvements. It's very hard to make improvements to 50 different development environments or to 50 different ways of running tests. But if you can agree on, in certain places we actually are going to standardize, it gives you just this amazing leverage point to drive more improvement. And that's a hump that companies need to get over, that there comes a time where the nature of the autonomy needs to change. The nature of the autonomy is not that you can make any technical decision that you choose. The nature of the autonomy is that within this set of constraints, you have a lot of freedom. But we're going to put these guardrails up and say that when you're logging, for example, you're going to do it like this. When you are tracking user events, user interactions in your user interface, you're going to do it like this. Again, so that you can start to gain that leverage of when everyone's doing things in a similar way, you can start to more easily improve the way everyone is doing things. And the final thing I'll say, which I kind of said before, is that this is never done. In fact, it becomes often one of the more interesting problems that a company is dealing with, in my personal humble opinion. Once I found this part of software engineering, the part of software engineering that was about building features suddenly felt very boring. Because these are some math hard problems that you have to solve as an engineering organization grows and as its code base grows. The problems get more interesting, the problems get more computer sciencey, and the impact that you can have gets to be just extremely rewarding. It is important that as you're sustaining a developer experience operation in the long run, that you're really careful with what you're investing in and how you're measuring your success. And you want to make sure that you're setting goals on the mission of understanding and improving software development and understanding and improving developer experience, and not setting goals on specific tactics. Like, we will have 80% of people using a remote development environment by the end of the quarter. You can set near-term objectives of like, yes, we want to do remote development environments, but just remember that the tactics are not the important thing. The tactics are how you're executing on that mission. That mission really is find any way that you can to make engineers able to produce more value more happily in the time that they have available to give to work. This can be a hard thing, because if you mistakenly kind of position developer experience as, well, we need to do this project, and we need to do this project, and we need to do this project, you'll have a really potentially disjointed experience. For one, you can end up with different people are solving the same problems just slightly differently, or you can end up with a project not getting funded because it just didn't make the cut. And now you kind of lost sight of that bigger experience picture, because you were too focused on like the specific thing that you were going to do. So I've seen this, I've seen this play out, especially when developer experience effort is focused around a single metric. For example, I've seen the productivity space be measured by the number of PRs that an engineer is putting up every day or every week or whatever. Be really, really wary of basing your entire existence of your developer experience effort on a single metric like that, because that metric is going to be impacted by lots and lots of things that are potentially out of your control. So really, again, staying focused on the mission, staying focused on that mission is that we want to have happy software engineers, happy productive software engineers, because happy productive software engineers do their best work. So that is the content of the presentation. And I just want to remind you again, size, age, and culture are just such a huge contributor to how this is going to go for you. So now that we're done, I'm happy to take questions or chat about any situations that you are seeing in your own world. I also want to thank Swarmia again for allowing me to be here and come talk to you. And then finally, I'll just put this up. Here's again how you can find me if you would like to.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was absolutely fantastic talk. I love the BRAINS acronym. and even though it's a little cheesy, I think that's perfect because I'm never going to forget it.
Yeah, exactly.
I might be like, what was the A again? But I'm never going to forget. I'm never going to forget that BRAINS is the acronym.
Exactly.
Now, I don't know if you saw in the chat, we have had some people with technical issues connecting. Yes. So I don't know how many questions we're going to get in from the audience. Yes. Obviously, I will keep an eye on that and prioritize anything that comes in. I've got loads of questions that I'd like to ask you. Although I have to say, it was an excellent talk because, or we think in similar ways, because your talk would raise a question for me and I'd be like, what about this? Like, for example, when you were talking about normalization, I'm like, but developers don't like being normalized. And then the next thing you came onto was like, well, obviously autonomy is very important.
Right. Yeah.
So
it's just echoing on that, like there's so many trade-offs in this space, and there's so many, this is such a fundamentally human thing that we're doing. It's not, and that's kind of what I love about this space too, is that it's yes, we're dealing with computers, but we're also dealing with users. You get to actually work with your users, and you can message them on Slack. So yeah, that's the thing that I really love about this, is that you do have to think about the people. And if you aren't used to that, that could be a challenge. And often the people who end up kind of in this productivity space may be from more of an infra background or a DevOpsy background or the sysadmin background or something like that. And that part of like recognizing that that you have users, you have a product, and you need to talk to them is one of the kind of bigger humps to get over for some engineering leaders who maybe haven't worked that way in the past.
Right. And in fact, it's if you can't get to that point, you're extremely limited, because that is, as you were saying, that is the whole essence of what you're doing. It's all about, it's not about optimizing technology or optimizing, a data flow. It's about the developer experience. So it's just not possible to do it without thinking in this kind of human-centered way, I guess.
Yeah, and there are definitely failure modes here where you get really focused on things that are easy to measure, like how long do our builds take, and you lose track of what is it like to actually develop. I have a front end background, so I always care about what's it like to develop, on the user interface of your application. What's happened at Stripe, we were really focused on bringing down kind of back end build time, because there's a lot of money to be saved by making that take less time, and it's better for the engineers too. But what we were completely missing was that for the engineers who were doing front end development, that wasn't the build they cared about. They cared about a local build that took 2 minutes, and so they would save save their change and press reload and wait forever. So that's an example of where getting and watching people and listening to people and not just relying on what your dashboards are telling you. It really revealed a whole other set of problems that the DevProd organization at Stripe hadn't been tackling. And so that kind of became my job while I was there, was to make lead the team that made the front end world a little bit better there.
Yeah, so something I want to address, because I can just imagine there are people watching this who know that the developer experience in their organization needs work, but they're getting resistance when they try and raise this or change things or get buy-in for budget and all these kind of things. And I wondered what kind of challenges you'd seen with, obviously, the example of Stripe. Stripe really cared, they were really doing the right things, and obviously the clients of Swarmia similarly. But what about for the people who are really hitting that wall in terms of getting
Yeah,
people to understand how important it is?
yeah. I mean, the first thing I'll say is that I think there is math that we can do to say how important this is. So if we think about how this can affect retention, and if we think about how this can affect the number of hours that are available to a developer in a week to do work, again, at certain size, those numbers actually become really compelling. It becomes really compelling to spend a developer to maybe make a dent in attrition, or to make it so that engineers just frankly have more time during the day. And that's a really quantifiable thing. If you have a build that is running 500 times a week and it takes 5 minutes every time, and that's 5 minutes that a developer is kind of waiting to do nothing, with the right number of developers, that 5 minutes is real interesting. You're talking about 5 minutes saved across 500 builds. That's 2,500 minutes. That's, I don't know how many hours, but more than one. And so you can start to put real math against this. That if we do this work, we're going to see these benefits, and they're not one-time benefits either. They're if you do the work, for example, to get remote development in place, then that benefits every engineer that comes from now on. Like, they also get that 5 minutes back, or whatever it is. Like you've kind of like reduced the cost of doing engineering across every hire that you have. And so that can be a cost that if you're intending to grow, and I know that not everyone is right now, but if you're intending to grow, that's probably the most compelling argument, is you aren't just improving things for the 20 engineers that you have today, you're making sure that the 100 engineers that you're going to hire can be rapidly successful. And those next 100 engineers are very different from the first 10, right? The first 10 were probably quite senior, quite independent, quite capable, and probably making reasonably good decisions, and probably talking to each other a lot, because there's only 10 of them. But when you get to 100, it becomes harder to kind of no one person can kind of keep all the context in their head that they need in order to make good decisions about this stuff. And so it really becomes important that you have somebody who owns these things and whose job it is to kind of keep track of those trade-offs and keep track of the challenges that engineers are running into and figure out how to prioritize them. So again, this ultimately becomes like your engineering ecosystem becomes a product. Your engineering ecosystem is a product already, whether you want it to be or not. It might be some shell scripts lying around in a folder somewhere, but the way that people do software engineering at your company is productivity is a product. And
right, might not be a very good product, but
right, it could be a terrible product. It could be a product that has no owner and no engineers working on it, but like that doesn't make it not a product. It's still and so I think a lot of this is just about realizing that there comes a point where you do need somebody to own this concept of what is it like to do software here. Because if no one owns that, then it will be left to the whims of a chaotic human ecosystem.
Yeah, and it was really interesting. I was really struck when you were saying about numbers, and you're not just fixing it for the engineers you have now, you're fixing it for all future engineers. And also, I suspect it's kind of cumulative in a way of, once you start improving things, it becomes easier to make further improvements. A bit like, it kind of reminded me of like dealing with a legacy code base.
Yes.
And the idea of you're never going to fix it. It's never going to be perfect, but you can either be on this spiral of continually making things better, or you can be on the spiral of everything kind of atrophying and becoming a massive mess. So yeah,
super similar. And I do think that the other thing that happens when you start to make these kinds of improvements, and this is a real aha moment for me, that somebody had to tell me this, and now I'm like, oh, of course. Going back to that front end build that was taking 2 minutes and was really like slowing down iteration loops. What we saw when we fixed that and got that down to basically like effectively instantaneous, not quite literally instantaneous, but we got it down to seconds. It changes how people work. Like, it changes how people do their job. They're more willing to test a smaller change if they can get feedback faster. And so they're less likely to write 100 lines with 5 bugs that they then have to go fix, because they're more likely to test their changes just as they go, every couple, every new 5-line function, like save and reload and see if it works. And so that's another really interesting thing in this space, is that you can actually create new ways. You can unblock new paths of working, and maybe it becomes more feasible to have 2 different people working on a feature that has back-end and front-end components to it, because you made somehow something schemas, I don't know, but somehow you made it easier for 2 people to work on a task instead of 1. So yeah, I think that's an interesting thing too, is that getting this mindset in place and making improvements in these tiny things can really change how people approach their work entirely in some really interesting and good ways.
Yeah, and because there's this other parallel with, there are lots of organizations now realizing that employee experience, to kind of talk more broadly, is so important, and in terms of motivation. But all of these words don't sound quite adequate. But it's like, for creative work, it's not just like whether you want to do it or not. It's like how it affects everything about how you go about it, how you problem solve, what options become available to you, depending on the environment. And you kind of mentioned at the start, we're not talking about developer experience, like, have they got my favorite drink? Are there any chocolate biscuits left? Because actually those things, although companies do invest in those things, they're so insignificant compared to the bill taking 2 minutes and interrupting your workflow, right? There's only so much like a chocolate biscuit can compensate for.
Well, and I wouldn't need a chocolate biscuit if the bill wasn't taking 2 minutes, right? I just do it my best. But yes, yeah, no, I think that there's a lot that goes into experience and how you feel. And we all know, like, it's frustrating when we try to do something and it's harder than we thought it was going to be. Like, ultimately, what we want to get down to is that an engineer working on a task is only thinking about the interesting parts of that task. The parts of that task that are unique, the parts of that task that are specific to the business and to the moment in time. You don't want them thinking about, why are my tests running? You don't want them thinking about, oh, did this deploy or not? I can't really tell. You don't want engineers thinking about that. You want engineers thinking about the actual business problem. And so this becomes a job of kind of clearing away everything that's not the actual business problem, while leaving enough room for the autonomy, because we can't predict what every business problem is going to be. So we can't lock things down so much that you can only solve this kind of business problem. But really, that's the mental model that I have, is that I'm trying to clear away everything that is not what the ticket says, right? Like, you shouldn't have to think about any of that.
Yeah, and for me, it's interesting with this kind of comparison with like large language models, or the kind of advent and explosion of large language models has made me think a lot more about, what does it mean to be human, and what are the unique human functions that we have. And actually, like you say, the great thing about humans as developers is that, like, our brains can switch between so many different things, and and have that judgment to decide what is relevant and what is not relevant. And like you say, the more of that, the rest of it, you can get machines to do that. It's actually optimizing this incredible power that we have in our brains.
Yes, yeah, and just making sure that's how you're spending your day. You're spending your day on that thought work and on that thing that we still need humans to do. Who knows what we will still need humans to do in another 5 years? We'll see. ChatGPT has written some code for me recently, just for fun. But yeah, I think that that's a really good way of thinking of it. That there's stuff that humans are uniquely good at, and let's make sure that they're spending their time on that, and that computers are doing the rest.
Fantastic. All right. Well, so just finally, to kind of flip that around the other way, to go from companies like not investing, and how do you convince them to start investing? I was really struck by your example at the end of like a company fixing on one particular metric, like number of commits, etc., etc. What are other examples you've come across of where companies, they do care and they are investing, but they're really getting it wrong? They've really missed the gist of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why, you've heard me in this talk and in this hour use the word productivity and experience and probably some other words too. And I think where companies get it wrong is they zero in too much on that productivity word, right? And don't think about it from an experience standpoint. When you think about productivity, well, my mind, I don't know about yours, but my mind goes to like the picture of the Ford assembly line back in the 20s of like
Right.
the cars are coming off the line. And, a CFO might think about it about the same way. Productivity is about, units produced per, per effort invested, right? That's not like be really cool if software development worked like that, because like a lot of things would be easier, but that's not how software development works, right? Like this is not an assembly line activity where we just, the car rolls down and we do our part and then it rolls on. And then sometime a car comes off at the end. That's not what we're doing when we're doing software engineering. We're doing, we are dealing with kind of a emergent system that no one really necessarily designed, and we are hopefully solving some unique problems in that system that is not like, let me screw this bolt in over and over and over again. Hopefully we're solving more interesting problems than that. So I think that what I find useful is to not zero in on any single metric. So DORA is a great example. DORA, DORA, and it's DevOps Research something. I always forget what the A is, but DORA I think does a good job of this, because it really, those 4 metrics that I talked about, they can be in tension with each other. And so when you look at the 4 as a whole, you can start to say, like, you can start to look and say, this is, I think we can do better. It's taking us 3 days to get every issue into production. Maybe we should have smaller issues and like get them into production in 1 day. So yeah, DORA is one, that's probably the simplest thing you can do to give you this kind of like multi-dimensional view, because of course, if you're shipping too fast, you're shipping issues into production. And if you're spending all of your time on shipping features, then you're probably incurring debt that is going to make it harder and harder for you to resolve issues in production in the future, for example. So I think DORA does a really good job of holding those things in tension, that quality and velocity are, they're in tension. If you want to get more elaborate, there's also the space framework, which I think really does a much better job of encapsulating all of this. It looks at these 5 pillars of satisfaction, performance, activity, communication and collaboration, and efficiency and flow. It doesn't tell you what to measure in those pillars. That's kind of up to you. But it really helps illustrate that, again, there's tension. You can have extremely high delivery for a period of time with extremely low satisfaction, right? And so it starts to highlight, well, like, yeah, we did, we hit all our goals, but our attrition was up 10%. So it does a good job, again, of capturing that tension that exists in here. And this is going to be really, what I'm saying can be really hard for leaders, though. I'm telling this ideal story. Yeah. Leaders are sometimes going to want, one number that moves. And if you have to do that, I encourage you to attach the numbers to individual projects and not to this overall. Like there is no one number. And if somebody tries to make you come up with one number to represent productivity or experience, you're not set up for success. So there is no one number. I wish there was one number, but I think using single numbers to guide specific initiatives, but you need this more holistic picture of DORA or space or something to really think about the whole ecosystem.
I really like the idea that once you've identified the metrics that are in tension with each other, that's how you know you're on the right track. Because I think for me, again, it's like highlighting, it's a complex system. It's not a delivery line. Yeah. Well, I think we're getting to the end, so I'd just like to say thank you so much, Rebecca.
Yes.
And everyone, please do connect with Rebecca. We're going to share links so you can join with her after the event or after you watch this video. And I'm guessing, Rebecca, you're happy to take questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to take questions now. Well, I guess we only have 3 minutes now, so maybe not now, but happy to take questions. Happy for you to drop me an email or connect with me on LinkedIn. And if I'm also happy if this is something that you are struggling with or exploring at your own organization, I'm really happy to talk to you about the problems you're seeing and some of the techniques that I've seen work and some of the techniques I've seen not work in addressing it. So, happy to do a more extended chat with anyone who's really trying to dig into this right now.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca.
Bytes.
Bytes is going to be taking a break in August, and we have some exciting things happening in September. We're thrilled to announce the first online Bytes workshop. On the 29th of September, Tom Sturge, the CTO at Motas Media, will be running an interactive workshop looking at the challenges commonly faced by CTOs when joining a new company. Whenever you move to a new company, you take on new challenges. As a CTO, these challenges could take many different forms. Technical issues with legacy code, culture issues with the shift of management, strategy issues with the rest of your new C-suite colleagues, to obviously name a few. From this workshop, you should learn multiple salutations for both technical and leadership issues, including management and culture, how to mitigate commonly occurring but seemingly unavoidable challenges, that you're not alone in the challenges that you face as a CTO. Have a great weekend. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, everyone. And see you all in September.
Thanks. Ton of fun.